Tonight, it is time to take responsibility for our security. The Prime Minister's response to the challenge from Donald Trump. An emergency meeting in Paris today, another between Russia and the United States tomorrow. Now Keir Starmer says the future of Europe is at stake.
There must be a US backstop, because a US security guarantee is the only way to effectively deter Russia from attacking Ukraine again.
But can Britain actually afford to play a major role in Ukraine's future? And will the rest of Europe join in? I've been hearing from the Polish foreign minister and a US senator loyal to Donald Trump about the shifting world order. Also coming up, the power of populism. We travel through the heartlands of Germany's far-right AfD party after its leader was backed by Elon Musk and the US vice president.
We have definitely too much foreigners and there's too much violence.
To put all the fault on migrants, that's just wrong.
I appreciate Donald Trump for his fight against wokeness. Now we have a government in America that shares the same values as the AfD.
Plus, the Vatican confirms the Pope is in a stable condition in hospital after being diagnosed with bronchitis. And the continuing attacks on civilians in Sudan and Gaza. I'll speak live to the Secretary General of global charity Médecins Sans Frontières. That's all coming up on The World with me, Yalda Hakim. Good evening. We'll focus on competing talks in Paris and Riyadh aimed at ending the war in Ukraine in a moment. But first, let's just bring you up to date on some breaking news. At least 8 people were reportedly injured after a plane flipped over while attempting to land at Pearson International Airport in Toronto, Canada. Well, these images show an airplane upside down on a snowy runway. Airport officials say all passengers and crew are accounted for. The aircraft was reportedly flying from Minneapolis to Toronto. Well, Sky's Rachel Venables joins me now. Rachel, I mean, these images are incredibly dramatic when you look at it. And on some level, a lucky escape for all of those people inside that plane, although we are hearing that one person is critical, at least in total, 8 people reportedly injured.
Very much so. I mean, when you look at those pictures, those live images from a desperately cold, very snowy Toronto right now, it does seem incredible that only 8 people were injured, though that doesn't limit in any way or undermine the severity potentially of those injuries, nor the impact, of course, of what's happened on them, nor the trauma, I'm sure, the terror that every single person on that plane, from the passengers to the crew to the pilot, would have felt. We don't know how it happened, how that aircraft came to be on its back, belly up effectively there in the snow in Toronto Airport, at Toronto Pearson International Airport. But we do know, as you've mentioned already, that 8 people were injured. We've had an update actually being reported by CBS News, citing the FAA in America, that 80 people on board, all 80 people seemingly on that flight that crashed, were evacuated. And certainly we've seen footage already posted on social media, certainly seemingly possibly by people who were on board. And you can see people looking shaky, looking stunned, but walking away. They seem to have been able to get off the plane. We know that 8 people were injured. That's come from the local paramedics services supervisor, Lawrence Saindon, stating that 8 people have been injured, one of them at least critical, but the rest mild to moderate. Toronto's Pearson Airport saying it was aware of this incident. It's a Delta plane arriving from Minneapolis with emergency teams responding. Obviously far too early to understand how this could have happened. No statements coming out yet from the Transportation, for example, Safety Board of Canada. They're the agency that investigate plane crashes. No response yet from a request for comment. But we do know that the weather there has been particularly bad recently, a major snowstorm hitting large parts of Canada, including Toronto over the weekend, with many flights, hundreds of flights having already been cancelled, with huge amount of snowfall, extreme cold and freezing rain. Whether or not that had something to do with this plane flipping and crashing too early to know, but we can say, of course, those pictures really quite staggering, and no doubt a huge amount of relief that for the most part people seem to have been able to disembark that plane, to evacuate largely unharmed, although we know 8 people were injured, one of them at least now in a critical condition.
Yeah, and Rachel, we've got a bit of an update. We now know that 9 people have been left injured, and as you say, 1 critically. So a bit of an update there on the number of injured. But as you say, all 80 passengers accounted for, 9 injured in that plane crash in Toronto. Rachel, thank you so much for bringing us up to date. Now, I have a question for you. What do you do when the most powerful country in the world seems determined to rewrite the rules of global security? What do you do if its leaders lecture you, deride your values, threaten to withdraw their protection and demand you pay more in defence spending? Well, if you're a European leader, you convene emergency talks, of course. They're an opportunity to project strength in the face of American hostility to all that you stand for. That was the plan anyway. But that's not what actually happened. This afternoon in Paris, the leaders of Britain, France and Germany clashed over sending peacekeeping troops to Ukraine, even as envoys from Russia and the United States headed to Saudi Arabia for talks aimed at ending the war. Europe is panicking. That was clear at the Munich Security Conference this weekend, and from Keir Starmer's plea to Washington this evening. Put simply, the message to Donald Trump is, we need you. Maybe that's a message designed to appeal to the president's ego ahead of face-to-face talks next week. But will it work? Lots to discuss tonight. Let's get started with a report from our Europe correspondent Adam Parsons in Paris.
The Prime Minister was the first guest to arrive at this meeting, warmly greeted by the French President. Leaders from 2 nations that have long cherished the transatlantic alliance and both now fear it fraying. More leaders followed from Europe's biggest countries, as well as from NATO and the European Union, a show of unity and of anxiety. Keir Starmer emerged from the meeting in sombre mood, admitting Europe must spend more on defence, but insisting that any peace deal in Ukraine would require American military muscle.
Europe must play its role, and I'm prepared to consider committing British forces on the ground alongside others if there is a lasting peace agreement. But there must be a US backstop, because a US security guarantee is the only way to effectively deter Russia from attacking Ukraine again.
European leaders gathered here purely because of the actions, rhetoric and criticism of Donald Trump and his top team. But while they met at the Elysee, the Americans and Russians were in Saudi Arabia, debating the future of Ukraine. The Russian delegation revelling in this sudden diplomatic turnabout, delighted that Europe has been left on the margins.
The
European philosophy hasn't gone anywhere, so I don't know what they should do at the negotiating table. If they're going to weasel out some cunning ideas about freezing the conflict while actually intending, as is their custom, nature and habit, to continue the war, then why should we invite them at all?
But could there really be a peace deal if Ukraine isn't at the table? The country's president has travelled to the Middle East, defiant.
Ukraine regards any negotiations on Ukraine without Ukraine as negotiations with no result. And we cannot acknowledge anything, any arrangements about us that were made without us.
Many of these leaders accept they need to invest more money, time and thought into defence. And if the world order is changing, if America is becoming a less reliable ally, then that process will surely accelerate. Adam Parsons, Sky News, Paris.
And we'll be speaking to Adam in a moment. But Sir Keir Starmer says he would be prepared to put a peacekeeping force in Ukraine if there is a deal to end the war with Russia. But what would a British deployment offer Kiev? And does the UK military even have the capacity for it? Security and Defence Editor Deborah Haynes has this assessment from Lviv in western Ukraine.
the relentless brutality of Russia's war. Here, Ukrainian soldiers on the counter-attack. This is a front line that could become frozen in any ceasefire deal, with foreign forces potentially brought in to keep the peace. British troops like these could be among them. They have expertise in commanding operations, but no longer much capacity.
What is lacking are the teeth, the sinews of war, the capabilities, the people, and this requires significant numbers of people. For example, if Britain was to sign up to providing some 10,000 troops for this, that would actually mean 30,000.
The last time the UK deployed forces at any kind of scale was to Afghanistan. But keeping 10,000 soldiers on the ground requires another 10,000 to be resting back home and a third 10,000 to be preparing to deploy. Today, Britain would likely struggle to muster a force half that size to help uphold any ceasefire. While Keir Starmer is talking about the possibility of sending British troops here to Ukraine, defence insiders say he needs a reality check. The armed forces have been hollowed out over decades, and sources tell me unless the Prime Minister quickly increases defence spending to a minimum of 2.5% of GDP, which amounts to an extra £5 billion a year, he faces the prospect of new big cuts to the military. Speaking at a security summit in Munich over the weekend, the Ukrainian president signalled any foreign peacekeeping force would need to comprise at least 110,000 troops. A huge undertaking for the UK and its European allies, unless the US also plays a part.
It's a heck of a lot cheaper to prevent a war than to have to fight one. And I think what's more important than the 2.5 or 2.65 debate that I read about going on here in the UK is what kind of force do you want to have? And what you need is you need a military force that can operate for sufficient duration and an ample scale to prevail in a conflict.
The hope, of course, is that if an international force is sent to Ukraine, it would never have to fight. But the soldiers would need Russia to believe that they could and fight to win. Deborah Haynes, Sky News, Lviv, Western Ukraine.
Well, I was in Munich over the weekend at the Munich Security Conference, where I spoke to the Polish Foreign Minister, Radosław Sikorski, who's been a strong advocate for Europe developing its own defence capabilities. I began by asking him what he made of US Vice President J.D. Vance's attack on Europe over migration and free speech.
This was a political, philosophical speech rather than about security. And when he says that Europe needs to do more in the area of defense, we completely agree. We've had a super law in Poland for 15 years, guaranteeing the army 2% of GDP, when we've now gone to 4.7% of GDP. Europe has been consuming a peace dividend for far too long.
I guess, every year we come to Munich and leaders talk about the need to step up when it comes to European defence. Do you think this time it's going to be different?
Well, budgets have already risen. Most allies now spend 2%, but times have changed. So we need to go higher because Putin is making gains. He is, on the basis of an economy 1/10 the size of the European Union, making more arms and ammunition. And that's inherently threatening, and we have to answer to that threat.
But what are the tangible things that need to happen? What does that look like in practice, say, in the next 12 months?
Well, you need to write the contracts to the armament companies who need to launch new production sites, new production lines. We are going to be in the third, fourth year of the war soon. Should have been done much earlier.
Why has Europe, help our audiences understand why Europe has struggled so much when it's come to defence spending. We're 11 years since Crimea, 8 years since Trump won, 3 years since the full-scale invasion.
Because choosing between butter and guns is always difficult, and some people hoped it would go away. It's not going away. And if Putin were to win in Ukraine, it would get much worse. So we'd better get our act together now.
How is Europe going to offer security guarantees to the Ukrainians, especially if the Americans say we can't do it?
Well, Russia, the United States and Britain have already given security guarantees to Ukraine under the Budapest Memorandum back in 1994 for Ukraine giving up a huge nuclear arsenal. Those didn't work. People now talk about NATO, but remember, Ukraine is a candidate to the European Union, and actually the European Treaty gives guarantees that are more explicit than those in the Washington Treaty.
Do you think the Americans are going to betray Ukraine?
I hope not. It would harm American interests, but we Europeans have to do more. We are actually spending more than the United States, but we need to do more specifically in the area of defense. We should also give Ukraine the money that they need to produce drones in their own factories. They made 1.5 million drones last year. They want to make 4.5 million drones this year. If they do that, they can probably stop Putin.
That was the Polish foreign minister speaking to me there over the weekend at the Munich Security Conference. And of course, as I said, I was there at Munich and I interviewed the president of the European Commission. You can see us there at the main hall. And we had this conversation about defense spending, especially for Europe, what Europe actually needs to do. But this conversation came just a few minutes before the Vice President J.D. Vance, the US Vice President J.D. Vance, addressed the European leaders who'd gathered there in Munich. Now, for many decades, this conference has been held, a place where foreign policy leaders, world leaders come together to discuss transatlantic alliances and what needs to be done. But the mood this year was completely different. Certainly after J.D. Vance spoke and lambasted Europe for what he claimed was a lack of free speech, and that Europe talks about being a continent of democracies, but in fact they are not. And it was only after this conference that J.D. Vance went and met with the leader of the far-right AfD party as well. So a lot of confusion, a lot of panic at the conference, big conversations around defence spending for the Europeans. Now, while I was there at the conference, I also spoke to Republican Senator Eric Schmidt. He's one of the American politicians in Donald Trump's inner circle. He told me it's time for the war in Ukraine to come to an end and that the US president is the right man to deliver that peace. But I began by asking what his message was to European leaders. Have a listen.
It's time to step up in a more meaningful way for defense. The United States is committed to the alliance and is not going anywhere, but we have to really pivot to the Indo-Pacific. China is by far and away our greatest adversary, greatest threat. They've increased their defense spending about 500% that we know of in the last 10 years. And so for us to sort of win the 21st century, which is how it's going to be judged between the United States and China, we have to be able to pivot. And in order to do that, our European allies need to step up. And not just, percentage of GDP and euros. Weapons win wars, not rhetoric. So there really needs to be that hard commitment. And I think there's some positive signs so far in the last day or two.
This is a message that the Europeans have been hearing for a long time, actually, and it's the way that President Trump has delivered it has been the starkest, and therefore it's ruffled some feathers. Do you think they're going to step up and they're actually finally listening?
It's necessary. The United States, I think, so I consider myself a realist. And you have to accept the assumption that we have some scarcity here. When you decide to make weapons in a defense industrial base for a land war in Europe, you're not making as many long-range fires for the Indo-Pacific. And so we need a strong industrial base, not just in Europe, but we're having this conversation in the United States too. How do we go do this? What does procurement reform look like? How can we have weapon systems of the future? We have to do that too, but we have to have our European partners do the same. And so I do think The fact that President Trump had this historic comeback, and the American people kind of spoke loudly. He won the popular vote, swept all the battleground states, I think adds more sense of urgency to that message because the American people feel the same way.
Are the Europeans and the Ukrainians going to be at the table during negotiations?
I'm not going to get out in front of President Trump. We've got a great relationship. I'm not going to get out in front of him on the negotiation. I can say this, there's nobody I'd rather have negotiating this than President Trump. He's very good at it, and I think he has all the interests in mind here. He campaigned on ending the war, and I think he wants to do that and have a peace that's lasting.
Do you think, though, that we're seeing preemptive concessions, perhaps the way President Obama did when he gave timelines about when to end the war in Afghanistan, for example, to the enemy? Do you think we're sort of seeing similar things in terms of like path to NATO, for example, and, you know, territory that the Ukrainians will probably have to give up?
I think that's a lot of speculation. People are watching every word that's said by everybody, but at the end of the day, the only thing that's going to matter is when President Trump is dealing with this with the folks on the other side. And so I'm very confident that we're going to have a peace, again, that is enduring and one that, you know, takes into account all of the concerns. But the truth is, 1 million people have died. This war has to come to an end, and I think President Trump's going to deliver that peace.
That was Senator Eric Schmidt there. Let's go straight to our Europe correspondent, Adam Parsons, who joins me live now from Paris. And Adam, it was quite something being in Munich at the weekend and speaking to European leaders, speaking to the Americans. I mean, certainly from the European side, for them, it felt like some kind of full-blown assault there in Munich, especially from the Vice President, J.D. Vance. But just tell us what's been happening today in Paris, especially that messaging coming from Keir Starmer.
Yeah, I mean, firstly, on your point, Yalda, diplomats have said to me that they felt that J.D. Vance was patronising, condescending, insulting. And they also said, remember, this is a man who once referred to Donald Trump as a fascist. So they said, can't always believe what J.D. Vance says. And that gives you an idea of the schism that is breaking up between European leaders and Americans. Now, European leaders met here in Paris today. They spoke for about 3 hours. Some of the real big hitters, from Ursula von der Leyen and Mark Rutte running the institutions, through to Olaf Scholz, Keir Starmer, Emmanuel Macron, Giorgia Meloni. And when I spoke to Keir Starmer after the event, the point he was saying was that he was prepared to put British troops into Ukraine in the event of some kind of peace deal being drawn up, but that he insisted that there would have to be what he referred to as a US backstop. Now, he wouldn't explain exactly what he meant by that, but I think we can assume he means a strong military presence in order to ensure that any peace agreement that is drawn up is actually adhered to. And they all said, all of these leaders said, look, a peace deal is a long, long way off. Make no mistake, they feel burnt by the fact that America and Russia are having these talks, that they have not been invited, and they do feel that it is unacceptable that Ukraine is not in the room while its own future is being drawn up.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, earlier we showed images of me speaking there to Ursula von der Leyen, and I put that to her. I said to her, will you be at the table? Will Europe be at the table? And she said, absolutely. But as you say, there is no doubt that European leaders feel sidelined at the moment. They feel completely burnt. And all eyes now on Riyadh, which, you know, the Saudis have suddenly emerged as sort of key players in this situation. Not the Europeans, but the Saudis. I mean, we know that President Zelensky is in the UAE at the moment. But tomorrow we're expecting the foreign ministers of Russia and the United States to meet.
Yeah, I mean, we're in the realms here of realpolitik, which is an expression that will take some of us back a few decades. We're going to have a table with the various officials on it, but effectively, on the one side, Marco Rubio, the new Secretary of State, and on the other side, Sergei Lavrov, a very much not new Russian foreign minister. And this will be, nominally, from the perspective of many people here, this is going to be about Ukraine. What they see here is the potential for a carve-up. I think we have to look at this in a wider perspective. which is they will talk about Ukraine. But I have no doubt at all that they will be talking about the dawn of a new relationship between Russia and the United States. Look at some of the other things that these two countries are interested in. Gaza. What's going to happen there? We know Donald Trump wants to buy Gaza. Russia has significant interest, of course, in Syria. Look at Greenland. America wants to take over Greenland. Look at the stroll of Europe. Look at the trading relationship. We've heard already Donald Trump regarded by his allies as a great deal maker. This isn't going to be a meeting of two minds who will discuss esoteric, moral, theoretical, ideological perspectives. This is two people who I think are going to be empowered to try to do a deal. And that's what will worry many here in Europe.
Yeah, absolutely. Adam, thank you so much for bringing us up to date there. You're watching The World with me, Yalda Hakim. Still to come on the programme, as Germans prepare to go to the polls, we travel to the heartland of the far-right AfD party to examine what's driving their support.
I'm Stephen Murphy and I'm Sky's Ireland correspondent based here in Dublin.
All alcohol products, not just wine, will have labels warning of liver disease and the link to fatal cancers.
Is it crazy? It's an industry worth around €14 billion a year. That's why Italy sees this Irish plan as such a threat.
It's always instructive and occasionally entertaining to hear what Donald Trump has to say on the issue of Brexit.
She's got her own way of doing it, that's okay.
The job takes me to every corner of this island.
The rioting stemmed from a horrific daytime stabbing attack at a primary school in the city centre.
The scale of the rioting and the destruction it caused is pretty much unprecedented here in Dublin.
Jerry, any comment on the judge's decision? Do you feel vindicated, Jerry? This is the end, the somewhat chaotic end, of a 52-day trial.
Micheál Martin could be set to head back to government with the Taoiseach Simon Harris.
Are you confident that you can now return as Taoiseach?
I'm cautiously optimistic and excited.
A mystery press conference hastily called. Leo Varadkar strode out and didn't disappoint.
I am resigning as President and Leader of Fine Gael effective today.
The people here sometimes feel they're somewhat neglected by the Irish government, to the extent that this place is sometimes known as the Forgotten County.
The waters of Ireland and Britain should be home to great white sharks, but none have ever been found.
If there are great white sharks in this area, there's no reason they wouldn't come here to feed. It's basically a buffet on a beach.
This could be not only a record-breaking storm, but potentially the most dangerous storm ever to hit Ireland.
Sky News, get the full story first.
I saw police being forceful, pushing young men and women to the ground as they made almost 100 arrests. Will the cold affect your voters?
Well, we have a lot of tremendous support.
Free, wherever you get your news. The people here know that worse storms may well be on their way. I'm Martha Kellner and I'm Sky's US correspondent based here in Los Angeles.
Mandatory evacuation, you must leave!
For many people, Harvey is far from over.
People here believe the water will be this deep for weeks.
I'm Greg Milam and I'm Sky's Chief North of England correspondent.
Are you trying to run me over, Sir Philip?
No, go away.
Look like it, sir. Will you respond to those who made accusations, Sir Philip?
Can you go away?
Sky News, the full story first.
We've got your Sunday mornings covered. From the front page and the sounds of the streets to the voices of the people who make the major calls and big picture politics beyond Westminster. We'll put you at the heart of our story.
I'm ready. Are you?
Join me, Trevor Phillips, Sunday mornings on Sky News.
Welcome back. Let's turn now to national elections taking place in Germany this weekend. Elon Musk and the US Vice President J.D. Vance have already endorsed the leader of the right-wing AfD party. Alternative for Germany is likely heading for its strongest national election result yet this month. Founded in 2013 as an anti-Euro party, it's shifted further to the right, focusing on immigration and challenging Islam as fundamentally not German. After Angela Merkel's decision to take in large numbers of migrants, the AfD won 12.6% of the vote to take seats in the German parliament for the first time in the 2017 national elections. Fast forward to the European Parliament elections last year, the AfD surged in both votes and seats and finished second. And in September, the best-known figures on its hardest right wing, Bjorn Höcke, secured the first far-right win in a state election in post-World War II Germany. Many around Europe, including those on the right, have previously kept their distance from the AfD. But it started to pick up some key allies, notoriously tech billionaire Elon Musk and the Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban. Our Europe correspondent Siobhan Robbins travelled across the country to track the rise of Germany's far-right party.
I'm really worried about the safety of my family.
A battle for power is raging in Germany. For the first time since World War II, a far-right party is expected to come second in a general election. And the country is divided.
They threaten my family. My husband's not from Germany. I've come from a Jewish heritage.
I don't want to live under a fascist regime.
When you have no arguments, especially in Germany, then you say Nazi.
We're heading directly in a situation of civil war.
So I'm on a journey through the AfD heartland to find out why some German voters are going far right.
It's a pretty chilly February morning and we're in the car heading out of Berlin towards the state of Saxony. It's in the east, and the reason we're going there is that the Alternative for Germany, or AfD, party is holding a rally. So basically the plan is head down there, have a chat to some of the people in the crowd and find out what's attracting them to the party.
So as we make our journey, let's run through the four main parties vying for power. In the lead at the moment, the party of former Chancellor Angela Merkel, the Christian Democrats, or CDU, and their CSU allies, led by this man, Friedrich Merz. There's the Social Democrats, or SPD, and the current Chancellor Olaf Scholz, the Greens with Robert Habeck, but polling second is the AfD, a party its leader calls conservative, but is dogged by allegations of racism, Islamophobia, and right-wing extremism, which it denies. Its Chancellor candidate is former banker Alice Weidel. She lives in Switzerland with her wife and kids and has been endorsed by Elon Musk.
I very much hope that the AfD does well and that Alice Weidel does become Chancellor. I think that would be very good for Germany.
Weidel's right-hand man, Tino Kruppalla, is due to be holding the rally we're heading to. But when we arrive, his opponents are ready and waiting. Anti-AfD protesters have surrounded the building where they'll meet. Many signs accuse the party of being Nazis or fascists. The AfD in Saxony has been officially designated as a far-right extremist group. But they're still the most popular party here, which terrifies some.
I don't want to live under in a fascist regime.
The AfD, though, would say that they're not fascist, they're the future for Germany.
They have no solutions. And they just say when there's not more migration, when there's less migration, then everything will be fine.
Say it loud, say it clear. Refugees are welcome here. So while it's not a big crowd here, it is actually quite tense. And we've seen just now the police have arrested some of the people from the anti-AfD side. They've been holding them by the fence there. They just let them go to a huge round of applause. But it shows you that even in AfD strongholds like Saxony, that there's a real tension and a real concern from people who are really worried about the future of Germany and the support for this party.
They know it's unlikely the AFD will get into government as they don't have a majority and no other party will work with them. But for some, the fact a far-right party's polling second is mind-blowing.
You speak to an AFD supporter, they'll say, I'm not a fascist, I'm not a racist, but we've taken too many migrants, for example, the country doesn't work for me.
Yeah.
What's your response to them?
I think they're just talking because if we look at this country, it's not my Syrian refugees whose fault it is that my wages are short or that, I don't know, that it's crime. It's not refugees. To put all the fault on migrants, that's just wrong. We have to...
There's propaganda.
Suddenly, a man trying to get to the AFD rally interrupts.
If you want to compare something, then you can compare the 20s.
It's immediately clear how divided voters are, especially around migration.
I agree with the deportation thing because we have definitely too much foreigners and there's too much violence. I'm worried about that we're heading directly in a situation of civil war.
You think it's that bad?
Yeah, but society is so divided into two parties. I would say that, and there's so much hate and so much violence. I never see a situation like this before.
With that warning, as the police keep the two sides apart, we make our way into the hall where the AFD meeting's being held. Upstairs, a crowd is enthusiastically listening to co-leader Tino Kruppala. Burly security guards keep an eye out for trouble, but the audience is mainly adored. However, afterwards it seems some want to keep their AFD support hidden. Peter only agrees to speak to us if we don't show his face.
You are being persecuted by such people like Antifa outside, and they are not really Democrats because they are not accepting different opinions. Germany has become very unsafe. I am thinking about leaving the country.
What you hear in there is quite interesting because if you are living in the UK or the US, it's really familiar. It's straight out of the populist playbook, what people are concerned about. So it might be immigration, it could be green policies, but it's things that you might have heard from Donald Trump.
The AFD formed in 2013. In the beginning, it was Eurosceptic and anti-Euro with a clear focus on the economy. But in 2015, under new leaders, it moved further right, becoming a radical populist party. The migrant crisis of 2015-16 led to increasingly anti-immigration and anti-Muslim language. Slogans including "Islam does not belong in Germany" and "Burqas, we're more into bikinis" have caused controversy. A number of party members have been accused of trivialising the Holocaust and Germany's Nazi past. In 2024, a party aide was accused of spying for China, and there were national protests after AFD members attended a meeting where the mass deportation of foreigners was discussed. But none of that seems to have dented the AFD's popularity in this election, where immigration is once again in the spotlight. With just over a week to go to the vote, an Afghan man admitted deliberately driving into a trade union protest in Munich. As police hold the 24-year-old, a few meters away, the innocents caught up in this carnage. This is one of a number of alleged attacks carried out by foreign suspects. Here, a Saudi doctor is arrested after allegedly driving into crowds at a Christmas market in Magdeburg. 6 people died and hundreds were injured. As Germans grieve and try to make sense of the senseless, the debate around migration rages. So as we head to Magdeburg to find out what people are thinking, I think it's really worth just quickly recapping the migration situation here in Germany. So Germany traditionally takes in the most asylum seekers in the EU.
And in 2015, the then Chancellor Angela Merkel announced an open door policy, which saw more than 1 million people arrive. And that helped fuel resentment and has really boosted the anti-migrant AfD.
In December, as Magdeburg mourned, the far right rallied. Asylum seekers out, they shouted. Some marched behind a banner saying remigration. That's a right-wing plan to forcibly deport foreigners en masse. Syrian-born Saeed says a division has opened up in the city, and some now see all migrants as the enemy.
I think one person was waiting in the bus station or tram station in Hasselbachplatz, and 3 or 4 people attacked him and punched him. 2 blocks from here, someone told me his son was in the elevator. I think he's 8 or 9-year-old, and his neighbor, he tried to shock him. I will just shock him.
Tried to strangle him?
Yeah.
Why?
I don't know.
And this was after the Christmas market?
After the Christmas market, yeah.
So people are afraid?
Of course, people are afraid. People are really, really afraid.
The AfD also held their own rally here after the Christmas market attack, mobilising mourners behind their anti-migrant, anti-Muslim message. Satish could hear the crowd from his restaurant, and on some points, he agrees.
So Germany is well aware that you have to integrate, you have to bring skills. Yeah, immigrants should not be a threat to your country. There you have to draw.
This is Germans in Frankfurt cheering as Syrians arrive in 2015. So this is some of 1 million people who came in under Merkel's open door policy.
I have seen that. I mean, I don't say it's a mistake, but it was ignorance. They were ignorant about how the people will respond. You know nothing about them, and you accept them just like accepting or thinking or projecting that they will be like us. So this is something I will say this was something not very well judged at that time.
Satish isn't alone in his concerns. Around 60% of Germans now think the country should take fewer refugees. And last year, the government introduced checks on the border. The CDU wants to make those permanent and also is looking at the possibility of stopping some asylum seekers from entering the country. But like them or loathe them, like many populist parties, the AfD is really effective at converting concerns into support. They feed off worries over the economy, the cost of living, climate controls and migration.
But for others, the AfD inspires dread, not hope. Hundreds of thousands have demonstrated against the far right in the run-up to this election.
The AfD leader says her party isn't far right, it's conservative. But I've come here to Thüringen, which is a heartland of the AfD, because tonight, one of the most radical members of the party is giving a speech. How do you feel, Mr. Höcke?
This is Björn Höcke, a poster boy for the far right. He's the anti-immigration, Russia-friendly, Eurosceptic leader
Germany first.
Who helped the AfD win its first state election since World War II. A man who once called Berlin's Holocaust Memorial a monument of shame, has twice been found guilty of using a Nazi slogan, but is still adored by supporters.
Some people say that the AfD and Björn Höcke are a danger to democracy, that your party's fascist or racist. What do you say?
When you have no arguments, especially in Germany, then you say Nazi, so that you have not true argument.
So you think the AfD is the future for Germany?
Yeah.
1 in 3 people in Thüringen supports the AfD. And as excitement builds for tonight's main event, the party's merchandise is proving popular.
So I just want to show you this table because it's a bit of a who's who of American and German populism. So we've got here Elon Musk's biography. At the back here, Iron Man, Donald Trump. Then another Donald Trump here. And then here we have Björn Höcke, who is the man of the moment tonight. And then, of course, here, the Chancellor candidate for the AfD with Elon Musk.
With every seat in the hall full, It's time to start. For the next 2 hours, Hooker and the local candidates lay out their vision for Germany. Migration, Trump, Musk and Russia all get name-checked. This man, who once stood on the fringes of a fringe party, is now central to what's likely to be the far-right's most successful general election since World War II.
We asked before if we could have a question with Jim Hooker, and his press people said he'd decide on the night. So we're going to try and get one. Herr Hooker? Herr Hooker? Herr Hooker? Einen Anfrage von Sky News?
But the press have to wait. First to autographs and selfies with a long line of fans. A wake-up call to anyone still questioning the power of populism.
Your critics call you and your party a danger to democracy. You've been called a fascist, a racist. What's your response to that?
Das sind die Zuschreibungen der politischen Gegner.
Those are labels from political opponents. The traditional parties in Germany have become indistinguishable in content. That's why I call them cartel parties. They've merged into a cartel. Now a competitor is emerging, a competitor who challenges their power.
And what of Donald Trump, Musk, and the US VP J.D. Vance, who looks open to working with the AfD?
I appreciate Donald Trump for his fight against wokeness. Now we have a government in America that shares the same values as the AfD.
That was really interesting, because while he spoke about topics you'd expect, the war in Ukraine, migration, criticism of the current government, he also said that during the world wars, Germany was surrounded by enemies. And now he claims there's an administration in the US and in Russia, which he says supports them. He really believes this is the AfD's time.
Keeping an eye on the party's rise is regional spy chief Stephen Kramer. His office has classified Thüringen AfD as right-wing extremists.
The extreme right has managed to get into, how we call it, the hard chamber of democracy, and therefore going basically after the roots of our democracy and our liberal society.
The AfD and their local leader deny they're extreme or a threat. But Stephen believes the consequences of this vote could be monumental.
I'm very worried. I'm not saying we're the Weimar Republic in 1933, because for various different reasons. But it's the last moment, basically, from my point of view, to change the direction.
It's that stark. If the brakes don't go on soon, Germany's going in the wrong direction.
That's how I see it.
There's no doubt Germany is divided. But on one point, many agree. This election is a pivotal moment in German history. Will the AfD gain power this time? That's highly unlikely. But if the next government fails to respond to the needs of the people, then the far right could seize victory in 2021.
That was Siobhan Robbins with that report. This is The World with me, Yalda Hakim. Next up on the programme, from Sudan to Gaza, I'll speak to the Secretary-General of Doctors Without Borders about the work they're doing to help people in the world's worst crisis.
We're going to do this 100 times every day for the next 3 months.
Why have we agreed to this?
Raises many questions about many things.
Actually seeing people impacted, she was so upset.
It was powerful. They kind of couldn't believe they were being berated here.
Very much on my terms, I think was the subtext. News happens fast around Donald Trump.
It was a kind of wow moment.
Yeah, that's what it feels like, doesn't it?
It's Trump world, and we just live in it.
So, where next?
Follow Trump 100 wherever you get your podcasts.
Prime Minister Modi is the most popular politician in the country. He is expected to win his third term in these elections.
Jubilation in the streets, while some emotional.
This is a political victory for Prime Minister Modi and his Hindu Nationalist Party, a promise fulfilled. I'm Neville Lazarus, and I'm Sky's reporter based in Delhi.
He paid over $50,000 to traffickers to get him to America. Instead, he was kidnapped, tied up, and threatened by smugglers. A commando from the state force walks me through to a Mai Tai village on the front line.
Firing the civilian and they're burning our house.
We cross to the opposite side, held by the cookies.
When they fire, we have to retaliate.
Sky News get the full story first. Companies like these are helping India in its trajectory to be a serious player in space exploration.
The enthusiasm is palpable. The young desire change.
These elections are a pivotal moment for the country's economic and political history. The concern here is that the public healthcare system is inadequate.
In a prayer, she's asking God to help understand what happened. I cannot carry on. God, help me. He says his world has crashed. Like him, there are scores of families searching for their loved ones.
Too often have families endured such tragedies for the negligence not only by the administration, but also by spiritual people in this country. Free wherever you get your news. Even though it has few seats in parliament, Kashmir is symbolic and very significant. It's often been called a nuclear flashpoint.
I saw police being forceful, pushing young men and women to the ground as they made almost 100 arrests. Will the cold affect your voters?
Well, we have a lot of tremendous support.
Free, wherever you get your news. The people here know that worse storms may well be on their way. I'm Martha Kellner and I'm Sky's US correspondent based here in Los Angeles.
Mandatory evacuation, you must leave!
For many people, Harvey is far from over.
People here believe the water will be this deep for weeks.
I'm Greg Milam and I'm Sky's chief North of England correspondent.
Are you trying to run me over, Sir Philip?
No, go away.
Look like it, sir. Will you respond to those who made accusations, Sir Philip?
Can you go away?
Sky News, the full story first.
Well, from Sudan to Gaza, we focus a lot of attention on this program to the world's worst crises. One team that is always there working to help people on the ground is Doctors Without Borders. They're currently assisting people affected by conflict, disease, outbreaks, natural and man-made disasters in more than 70 countries around the world. Well, joining me now here in the studio is Christopher Lockyer, Secretary-General of Doctors Without Borders. Thank you so much, Chris, for joining us here on the programme. You have recently just come out of Khartoum. You're in Sudan, in the Sudanese capital. Just give us a sense of what it was like there.
Well, I think while I was there, one of the key moments was I was in a hospital called Al Now, which is in the Omdurman district of Khartoum. And as I was in the hospital, or just before I got to the hospital, there was a shelling in a market nearby, a couple of kilometres away. And when I got to the hospital, the scenes were really catastrophic. There were dozens and dozens of people needing urgent trauma care. I mean, I was in the trauma area of the hospital, and I counted over 60 patients that were in desperate need of assistance, of medical intervention. The hospital was flooded. Just outside the morgue, there was a pile of bodies. So there was dozens and dozens of people who were killed in that incident, and many more who were injured. And this is one example of a series of critical incidents of mass casualties, as we call them, mass casualty incidents that happened over the space of 3 or 4 days throughout Sudan in that very short period. And so it's a conflict where it's a conflict that is conflict against civilians that really characterises what is happening here. And this is happening every day and as we speak.
Yeah, absolutely. Unfortunately, we're up against time on the programme, but you know, you have teams working all over the world, namely in these, hot spots like Sudan, like in Gaza. And a lot of the time, your teams also work a lot with the local teams as well, don't you? I mean, you've got roughly about 5,000 people working for you guys?
We have 5,000 people that we're working with in Sudan. So around 2,000 of those are our staff, so local staff or international staff, and around 3,000 of those are Ministry of Health staff that we're working with in we have 24 hospitals in Sudan and 42 health centres. So it's a very big operation that's working in 10 of the 18 states of Sudan.
Tell me about Gaza, because of course you've spent time in Gaza as well. We hear these horrific stories about, doctors having to amputate without anaesthetic, for example. Have you had those experiences as well?
Well, the health system in Gaza has been all but destroyed. There's only something like 18 of the 36 hospitals which are still partially operational. And what we're seeing at the moment is that as people are moving back, there's been about 500,000 people have moved back to the north of Gaza, and they're returning to absolute devastation, both their own houses, but also the health system as a whole. And so there is a desperate need, firstly, for the ceasefire to continue. And so we would implore both Hamas and Israel, their allies, their supporters, to do everything they can to ensure that this ceasefire is maintained, because not only is that essential to continue to stop the absolute horrendous levels of killing, but to ensure that humanitarian assistance can come in a meaningful way.
I have about 30 seconds to go, but just the impact of, programmes being cancelled, the USAID programmes. I know you guys aren't funded, but you see it on the ground.
Yeah, well, when I was in Khartoum, I was speaking to the authorities there, and they said that in the 2 days before I met them, there was 5 organisations who'd had to stop activities just in those previous 2 days. In places like Nyala, which is the capital of South Darfur, organisations have had to stop providing water and healthcare to displaced people.
Well, Chris, we're really grateful for you for coming on the programme, but also all of the work you do. Thank you so much. And that's it from me and the team. Good night.
We've got your Sunday mornings covered. From the front page and the sounds of the streets to the voices of the people who make the major calls and big picture politics beyond Westminster. We'll put you at the heart of our story. I'm ready. Are you? Join me, Trevor Phillips, Sunday mornings on Sky News.
Weeknights on Sky News.
This is your chance. Tell people.
Welcome to the Politics Hub.
Our police force has apologised.
If you want to find out about Grimsby, you come to the docks.
I'm live in Jerusalem.
Are you not concerned that that could lead to all-out war?
Hello there, good evening. There are fears of an upsurge in violence. What's at stake here?
You are watching the press preview, a first look at the front pages as they arrive.